In the shadow of power, ambition burns brightest, and no one knew this better than Anne Boleyn, the woman who dared to defy a king, reshape a nation, and pay the ultimate price for it. Her story is one of passion, betrayal, and a throne drenched in blood. This is how it began. England, 1522. The court of Henry VIII was a viper's nest of intrigue, where loyalty was fleeting and favor was life itself. Into this world stepped Anne Boleyn, a woman unlike any other. Witty, bold, and fiercely intelligent, she was no mere pawn in the games of men. She was a player. Henry VIII was married to Catherine of Aragon, a devoted queen who had given him a daughter, Mary, but no male heir. The king's desperation for a son festered like an open wound. And then he saw her, Anne. Some say it was her dark eyes that ensnared him. Others, her sharp tongue and refusal to bow. While Henry's previous mistresses had been fleeting distractions, Anne was different. She would not be possessed, not without a crown. For 7 years, Henry pursued her, breaking from the Catholic Church, defying the Pope, and plunging England into religious chaos, all for Anne. In 1533, his obsession bore fruit. He divorced Catherine, married Anne in secret, and placed the crown upon her head. But crowns are heavy, and thrones are brittle. Anne's triumph was absolute, for now. The king had moved heaven and earth to make her queen, and yet, the same hands that lifted her could just as easily destroy her. For in the court of Henry VIII, love was never just love, it was power, and power demands sacrifice. January 1533. Anne Boleyn, now carrying the king's child, stood at the precipice of her greatest triumph and her most dangerous gamble. The crown was hers, but the court was not, and, in the shadows, enemies sharpened their knives. She had played the game masterfully, refusing to surrender her virtue until Henry made her queen. Now, as England's new sovereign, she wielded influence unlike any consort before her. But power, once seized, must be held. And Anne knew better than most. A woman's favor in the Tudor court was as fragile as glass. Her rise had left scars. Catherine of Aragon, the discarded queen, still had supporters. Princess Mary, declared a bastard by Henry's new order, was a living reminder of Anne's contested legitimacy. And then, there was the church. Anne, a secret reformist at heart, encouraged Henry's defiance of the Pope. But with every monastery seized, every priest exiled, the whispers grew louder. She is a heretic. She is a witch. The people, still loyal to the old faith, began to turn against her. Then, in September of 1533, the moment of reckoning arrived. Anne gave birth, not to the promised prince, but to a healthy girl, Elizabeth. The king's smile faltered. The court held its breath. A daughter was not enough, not after everything. The crown, the church, the very fate of England, all had been overturned for a son. And Anne had failed. 2 more pregnancies followed. Both ended in heartbreak. And with each loss, Henry's patience thinned. The king, who had once written love letters, now barely looked at her. The courtiers, sensing the shift, began to withdraw like rats from a sinking ship. And then, the trap was set. In the spring of 1536, whispers slithered through the palace. Whispers of treason, of adultery, of a queen who had dared to rise too high, and now would fall, April 30th, 1536. The May Day celebrations had barely begun when the king abruptly rose from his seat, his face dark, his manner ice. Without a word to his queen, Henry VIII left the tournament grounds and never looked back. In that moment, Anne Boleyn knew the game was over. Within hours, her closest allies were arrested. Mark Smeaton, the musician, was tortured into confession. Her own brother George was charged with unspeakable crimes. And Anne was summoned before the Privy Council, accused of adultery with 5 men, including her sibling. The charges were impossible, the timeline absurd. To believe them, one would have to think Anne, 6 months pregnant at one point, had bedded men in her royal chambers, in full view of her ladies. But truth mattered little. This was execution disguised as justice. And reaction. "Master Kingston, shall I go into a dungeon?" The Tower Constable answered no. She would stay in the same rooms where she awaited her coronation. History's cruelest joke. A queen imprisoned where she was once crowned. For 17 days she prepared to meet her God. She swore her innocence before any who would listen. Even her jailers remarked on her dignity. This woman, who had once made kings kneel, now facing death with terrifying calm. Henry, in his mercy, had ordered a swordsman from Calais. An executioner's axe might falter, a blade would be swift. Even in death, Anne Boleyn would be different. Dawn approached. The hour of the wolf was near, and on Tower Green, a scaffold stood waiting. May 19, 1536. Before the sun had risen, a small group gathered in the cold shadows of the tower. They came to witness something England had not seen in living memory: the execution of a queen. Anne had spent her final hours in desperate prayer. Some say she laughed, a last act of defiance. Others claim she trembled. But when Sir William Kingston came to escort her, she rose with terrifying composure. The woman who had once danced in satin and jewels now walked to her death in a plain gray gown. She climbed the scaffold steps carefully, her legs weak from fear or fasting. Before her stood the executioner, his face obscured. Behind her, a crowd of witnesses, some weeping, some merely curious. And somewhere beyond those walls, Henry waited for the cannon blast that would signal his freedom. Anne, historical recreation, steady voice. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die." Her final words were measured. Careful, she praised the king, swore loyalty to Elizabeth, but pointedly refused to confess, because to confess would condemn her daughter to bastardy. Even now, she played the political game. The swordsman raised his blade. Anne's lips moved one last time. "Jesus, receive my soul." The crowd held its breath. It was done. In one stroke, Henry's great passion became his most convenient ghost. The woman who had changed England forever was gone, her body thrown into an arrow chest, her head cradled in the crook of her own arm. But stories like Anne's do not end with graves. Even in death, she haunted Henry. Within days of her execution, he married Jane Seymour. Within years, he would order her portrait destroyed. Yet somehow, she endured, because the daughter she left behind would become England's greatest queen. The religious reform she championed would reshape a nation, and the legend of Anne Boleyn, the woman who laughed in the face of kings, would outlive them all. They thought they could erase her. They were wrong. They say her spirit never left. That on certain May mornings, when the fog hangs thick over Tower Green, you can still hear the rustle of gray damask and the whisper of a prayer cut short. Nearly 5 centuries have passed since that sword fell, yet Anne Boleyn haunts us still, not as a ghost story, but as something far more powerful. A woman so vivid, so utterly human in her brilliance and flaws, that history itself could not bury her. She was erased from official records, yet here she is, in our films, our novels, our debates. Was she a schemer, a victim, a reformist ahead of her time? Perhaps she was all these things? Because Anne Boleyn was never just Henry's queen. She was a woman who dared to want more than the world offered. Look closer at the artifacts she left behind. This pearl necklace, worn in her most famous portrait. The book of hours she scribbled in, her manicured nails leaving marks in the margins. These are not relics of a villain or saint. They're the traces of a person, and what of her greatest legacy? Elizabeth, the child-declared bastard, would grow up to wield her mother's sharp wit and political genius, proving in glittering triumph that Anne's bloodline was anything but cursed. Today, scholars still fight over Anne's true nature, but perhaps the most telling fact is this: of Henry's 6 wives, only Anne's name makes hearts race. Only Anne's story still sparks outrage, sympathy, and fascination in equal measure. She was the queen who lasted just 1,000 days, yet changed England forever. the mother of a legend, the woman who proved that even a king's wrath cannot kill an idea, that when a brilliant mind meets an unbreakable will, history remembers. So the next time you hear her name, Anne Boleyn, the beheaded queen, remember this: heads roll, but legacies are forever. If you followed Anne's journey to the end, consider subscribing to The Past Unfolded. New stories of history's most fascinating figures arrive each week, because the past is never truly gone.